The rain had been falling steadily for hours, washing the autumn leaves into swirling puddles along the winding country road. Frank hadn't meant to take the long way home, but since Margaret passed last spring, he'd found himself driving without purpose more often, searching perhaps for something he couldn't name. As he rounded a bend near the old Miller farm, his headlights caught a shape on the shoulder, small, motionless. At first, he thought it was just a piece of clothing or a fox caught in the storm, but something in his chest tugged him to slow down. When he stepped out and knelt beside the sodden bundle, he saw the delicate rise and fall of its chest. A cat, barely more than a shadow of one. Its fur was matted with rain and filth, eyes crusted shut, ribs like twigs beneath paper-thin skin. Frank hesitated only a moment before carefully wrapping it in his flannel coat. The creature didn't resist. He laid it on the passenger seat and drove on, casting glances its way every few seconds. There was something disturbingly human in its stillness, as if it had already given up. But minutes later, as he pulled into his driveway and reached to lift it, the cat did something that froze him in place. It opened its eyes, just barely, and reached one trembling paw to rest on his hand. Chapter 2. A Name in the Quiet. The old house was warm, dry, and thick with memories. Frank hadn't let much change since Margaret died. Her knitting basket still sat by the fireplace, untouched. As he dried the cat with a towel, he thought of the way she used to hum softly when comforting something fragile. The sound came back to him, unbidden, and he found himself humming too. He placed the cat in a cardboard box lined with towels and set it beside the heater. It hadn't moved since touching his hand. He wondered if it would survive the night. But the next morning, it was sitting up unsteady but awake, watching him with eyes like wet amber. "You made it," Frank said, voice hoarse from disuse. "You stubborn little thing." The cat blinked. He sat on the floor beside it, rubbing his tired hands together. "You need a name," he murmured. His eyes drifted to the photograph on the mantel, Margaret smiling in her garden, sunflowers towering behind her. She'd always loved the morning glories that crept along the fence. "Glory," he said softly. "You'll be Glory." The cat didn't flinch. Instead, she closed her eyes and leaned slightly into the towel where his hand had rested. For the first time in months, the silence of the house didn't feel quite so heavy. Chapter 3. The watcher in the window days passed. Glory began to eat, just a few bites of soft food at first, then more with each passing meal. She was still too weak to walk far, but she followed Frank with her eyes as he moved around the kitchen, mended a drawer, or sat on the porch steps with his coffee. One afternoon, as golden light filtered through the living room curtains, Frank noticed her sitting on the windowsill, her gaze fixed intently outside. He followed her line of sight, but saw nothing but the rustling maple and the empty road. "You looking for someone?" he asked, half joking. She turned and looked at him, slow and solemn. The next morning, she did it again. Same spot, same stillness. And on the third day, just as the sun rose pale and grey, Frank heard her meowing, not frantically but urgently, from that same window. When he opened the door to see what she was watching, he saw a small bundle just beyond the gate. A kitten, no more than a few weeks old, soaked and shivering. His heart dropped. Had Glory somehow known? Chapter 4. The Second Arrival. The kitten was colder than Glory had been, limp, barely breathing. Frank acted on instinct now, his hands no longer uncertain. He dried the tiny creature, warmed it, and placed it beside Glory's box. She reached out with one paw and touched its head gently. It nestled into her without hesitation. Frank stood over them, overcome by a wave of something deeper than surprise. Was this chance, coincidence, or something else? That night, he didn't sleep. He sat beside them in his old recliner, watching the two sleep bundled in blankets. He remembered Margaret's words, spoken years ago after they buried their last old barn cat. They always find their way back. Sometimes not the same body, but the same soul. He hadn't understood then, but now, watching Glory and the new kitten, he wasn't so sure he didn't. And just before dawn, Glory did something she hadn't done before. She climbed into his lap, purred once, and fell asleep. Chapter 5. Winter at the Door. As the days shortened and the air grew sharp with frost, the small house became a sanctuary. Glory regained her strength steadily, her coat growing softer, fuller. The kitten, whom Frank named Pip, thrived under her watchful eye. Where Glory was quiet and calm, Pip was a flurry of energy, chasing shadows, toppling books, and curling up on Frank's slippers like he owned the place. Frank laughed more now, though quietly the way someone does when they're remembering how. He found himself talking aloud again, not just to the cats, but to Margaret's photograph, telling her about Pip's latest antics, or how Glory refused to eat unless the food bowl was set just right. One evening, a heavy snow began to fall. Frank brought in more firewood, wrapped the pipes, checked the windows. As he moved through the tasks, he felt a lightness in his chest. Purpose. Later that night, as the wind howled and snow blanketed the porch steps, Frank sat with a mug of tea. Glory leapt softly onto the arm of the chair. She touched his cheek with her nose, just once, and then stared deep into his eyes. It was then he saw it. Recognition. Not like an animal recognizing its caretaker, but something more ancient, as if she'd known him through lifetimes. He whispered, "Margaret." Glory blinked, slow and solemn. The fire crackled. The moment passed, but something inside Frank had shifted. Chapter 6. The Letters in the Drawer. The storm lasted 2 days. Frank stayed inside, wrapped in warmth and fur and memory. He found himself pulling open drawers he hadn't touched in years. In the hallway cabinet, beneath old towels and loose buttons, he found a stack of Margaret's letters, notes she'd written to herself, to him, to no one. One was dated the day after their cat Lily passed away 10 winters ago. "I keep feeling her near me, like she's watching. If there's a way back, I hope she finds it." Frank read the line 3 times. He looked over at Glory, asleep with Pip curled under her chin. A sudden quiet understanding filled the room. Not certainty. No, life rarely grants that. But a comfort, like the closing of a circle. That evening he read the letter aloud beside the fire. Glory listened, unmoving, her eyes half-lidded in peace, and just before bed she meowed once, low, steady, almost like a word. Frank didn't ask her to say it again. He didn't need to. Chapter 7. Spring and Something New. By the time the snow melted, Glory and Pip were fixtures in the neighborhood. Children came by to leave treats, neighbors dropped off old towels and toys. Frank, once the quiet man who kept to himself, now found himself at the center of gentle attention. He even started volunteering at the animal shelter on weekends, something Margaret had always wanted to do. One afternoon, as tulips bloomed and the air turned soft with spring, a young woman stopped by. She held a box of supplies and wore the uncertain look of someone stepping into a new beginning. "I just moved in across the lane," she said. "The folks at the shelter said you might be the right person to ask. I found a cat, she's hurt, and I don't know what to do." Frank smiled. Not a wide smile, but one that reached into the quiet spaces of his heart. "You came to the right place," he said. Glory and Pip watched from the window as he stepped outside, coat already in hand. And in that moment, it was clear to anyone who cared to look. Frank hadn't rescued a dying cat that night on the road. She had rescued him.